I'm really actually keen to see what magic you've got to show us, AK. I don't know, is it black magic or, the light side magic? You're talking about no code stuff when you're definitely a dark guy side.
Actually, this is more like a no code. I was low code. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like quite cool things, but it's just quite good to see how a small thing can make a kind of like a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's definitely something that I've seen a lot with the Power Platform is that, they talk about low code, no code, but then quite often they talk about those options where, you just put in a command and then magic happens and lots of magic happens. And you're like, wow, I typed in a command, which technically is not really code, it's just, asking the system to do something. And then you've got all of that code that is done behind the scenes and, does most of the heavy lifting for you. So it's really good to see that Microsoft is heading towards that direction and also incorporating it within the best sort of maker user experience that they're expecting. So it's really good to see that. All right, I think we'll start with the session. So thank you, AK, for joining us today. Just a quick introduction about AK. AK is our local champion. He's one of the people that I enjoyed working with quite a lot, very technically capable. Definitely he's coming from the dark side, from a sort of programming, hardcore programmer even type of background. And now, as we see all of that goodness coming with the low-code, no-code platforms, we're like, ooh, I would like to play with that as well. And I can see how that can be improved over time. One thing that I talk a lot about in sessions is that with anything to do with pro code, we had decades of experience and of maturity that comes with it. So in terms of telling us how to reuse components, in terms of telling us when we're doing something we're not supposed to do, in terms of highlighting how things can be done better. In the no-code, low-code environment, those tools are not mature yet. They're definitely emerging. There's definitely focus on making sure that we've got that feedback coming from the system, static analysis, telling us there is a way to improve it. But a lot of it will come from experience. And this is why I'm actually really keen to see what AK has to present today in terms of you think you're doing something the right way using low code, no code, but there is an even better way and a better best practice to actually implement your configuration or your custom connector in today's example. So, AK in a nutshell, I actually heard that from the community. People hire AK and then they go, why do we pay vendors and large teams of people to implement things when we can get AK? So he's that dangerous. And this session is definitely a testament for how he thinks out of the box, how he thinks what is the simplest way to implement something that can become quite powerful. So without further ado, AK, I'll hand over to you and wow me.
All right. Thanks for selling me, Robbie. All right, so let me share you my screens and let me know if you can see it.
Yeah, I can see your screen.
And can you see that PowerPoint?
Yeah, your PowerPoint. I can see that. It's not in presenter mode, but it's just PowerPoint.
So I'm just switching mine. Okay. Right. You can still see it, right? The presentation mode?
Yep. All clear, all good.
Good. So today's session is making our custom connector reusable. So just going back with like a backtrack, I remember I presented the custom connector on the very first Dynamic 365 Saturday in New Zealand. And since then, I don't really work on any more custom connectors. And because one of the things is there's no much changes in custom connector. But recently, I have a look at the custom connector and just find out like a lot of things that we can do. So today's agenda is like we're going through like a magic connector. What is a magic connector in the Power Platforms, and we will look at the creating a new custom connectors, and they follow by making that a new connector reusable. So a bit of like a complex scenarios, like go through that, and we will go through Q&A. And if you have any questions at any time, just feel free to jump in and ask me a question. Right, so the first one, a magic connector, right? So what's the magic connector, what I'm talking about? And yeah, if people like to answer it, just unmute it and just answer it. And yesterday I looked at the Power Automate, and currently we have 643 connectors in Power Automate. So this is a huge number. And out of them, I find there's only one magic connector in the Power Automate. I give like a 5 seconds, 10 seconds if anyone to jump in. What is a magic connector in Power Automate?
No clue. I've never heard that term before.
So you might be familiar with this, Rami.
Looks familiar for sure.
Yeah, so this is the HTTP connector. So this is the magic connector that I think this is the magic, and because this is so powerful. The reason I'm saying this is so powerful HTTP connector, it can connect to any of the HTTP API endpoint, basically virtually it is limitless. As long as you have the proper permissions and the endpoint, you can connect to it. Currently, as you can see, we have over 600 connectors, and you will have your own legacy API, in-house API. And most of the people, or most of the time, we use the HTTP connector to call it from the Power Automate and to deal with these APIs. So this is basically really limitless. As long as you have the connections, you can connect it. And it's also offer like a quite flexible authentication mechanisms. Like as you can see here, you have the basics authentications, which is pretty old school, and client certificate, which is based on the OAuth, and also like an active directory OAuth, and you can have like different kind of authentications. And they also offer like a client credentials, which mainly for the server to server site integrations, and even it making it to bring to the next level. It even offer the client sessions using the client certificate. So it's really powerful. And given that these authentication mechanisms are quite standard across in the industry, so it's really powerful one. And one of the things is the downside is it is kind of like a developer friendly. So what I would do is now is I would jump into the I switch to the screens to the demo mode and see what the magic connectors can do. Right. Can you see my
Yep.
right? Good. So what I will do here is I will create a new cloud flow. It doesn't really matter whether it is instant or automate. Manually trigger it. I will switch to another screen as well. I'm here now. As you can see my Postman, and I have an API. So this API is called ping me. Actually, it's just nothing. You pass the some parameter, it return you some message. So this is the API that I'm talking about. That might be your existing API and your internet API, which is not part of the 643 connectors in Power Automate. So these APIs, we got like a API key protected and pass a few parameter, and I send to that, and it will say hello AK, visit blah blah blah. And if I change the name in the parameter, so this API basically is very simple. Just get the name and return it. So obviously in the real life you will do some processing and get it back to the caller. So what we're going to do is this is the Postman, which a lot of developers like to use it, and that I'm going to replicate this behavior in the Power Automate is using a magic connector, which is the HTTP connector. So all I need to do is I'll copy this. Oops, where is my screen? It's gone. Sorry about that. So if you go here and type the HTTP, then you will see the HTTP connector. There's another thing called HTTP with Azure AD. So basically it's quite similar, but this is mainly really work with if you're working with the Azure. But if for the HTTP, if you are calling the API from just an online API, probably HTTP is a better way. So choose this, and you will see you can see the method. I will go through this later. I'm going to use the post, the URL. This is the URL that I want to call, and the body. So the body. So let me pass this to the that, and so basically that's it. Just saving it, and that's that. Oh, it's successfully run. So as you can see, I am calling my API and it returns this message. So it works. It's not a problem, and that's why this HTTP connector is pretty useful. As long as you have the endpoint, you can connect it from your Power Automate. Right. So now going back the first part of the demo. So that's the demo, and now, so what is the challenge with this magic connector, the HTTP? Because it's so flexible, it's so powerful, right? So, one of the things that you work on the public sector, so like a government, this became a risk. So we need to control it, and we need to govern it. And so setting up the data loss prevention policy for HTTP connectors is pretty limited. So it is currently, as of now, either you turn off the HTTP connector or turn on the HTTP connector. So it's either you can or you cannot use. But the problem is if you allow the people to use it, they can virtually connect to any API. So that's basically, defeat the purpose of having the DLP policy. But the good news is that there's an endpoint restriction, but the bad news is it's in the preview. So as you can see, if you go to the DLP policy, look for the HTTP connectors, you can actually configure what are the endpoints you want to allow the user to connect. For example, we might block the Facebook connector, but if we turn on the HTTP connector, anybody can connect to Facebook if they are technically they have the technical knowledge, because the Facebook can be accessed from the any HTTP. So here we can say, hey, I want to stop accessing to the HTTP connector to the Facebook endpoint. So we could potentially do that, but bear in mind this is still in the preview. And again, as you can see, the way I configure is, obviously I'm quite familiar with the HTTP connectors. And actually, it is not user-friendly. What I just mean by not user-friendly is, if you look at the HTTP connector, you got like quite technical terms like a method. What are the methods? Get, put, post, patch, delete. It became a bit kind of like a technical terms. Like obviously, get is like more like a retrieve, and post and put, patch is more like edit mode, and delete is kind of like a self-describe. But if you explain it to the I'm not a web person's kind, so it can be quite confusing. And also you need to worry about the headers. So some APIs you need to pass the specific parameter so that you can call the API. You need to know about the queries and body. And you might notice in the example that I demonstrated, the body is based on the JSONs, right? So it's not everybody work comfortable working with the JSONs, but that can be the challenge. And also you need to worry about the authentications. Obviously in my demo, I make it really simple and I don't have any authentications, but here, if we need to have those like OAuth authentications, and that became a little bit technical. So all good for now. And so how do we sort out all these challenges? And this is where the custom connector come in. So basically, the custom connector is a wrapper of HTTP connector. So it doesn't do anything special, but it is more like a user-friendly version of HTTP connector. So what I mean by user-friendly version of HTTP connectors is like you don't need to worry about the putting those methods like the get, post, delete, patch, and you don't need to worry about the headers, not to worry about the body. Even if the JSON, we can make it user-friendly so user can easily enter it. And the authentication, so we can hide the complexity, encapsulate the complexity away from the end users and make it really, user-friendly versions. And also, it's become quite easy to put like govern the connectors. Like you can set up the DLP policy to allow or block the specific connector. So which is pretty good. And the good point is the good point about the user friendliness is quite easy to create a new one. And when you create a new one, there's a few ways that you can create it. Is for example, recently I used the Postman. You can import the Postman collections to create a new custom connector. Or if you have the Swagger, which is the API open API definition file, it can be downloaded from most of the API providers, and you can easily create it. You don't need to be to know about all this stuff. And another thing, if you are developing your own API in Azure, you can directly create the custom connector from APIM, the Azure API management, and publish it directly to your Power Platform. So you go to the API management, you publish it, the connector will appear in their Power Platform environment. And obviously, there's always the way to create manually. So in this session, so what I'm going to focus is creating the custom connector manually, because it will be more interesting. It will make this simple answer a lot of the questions. So another demo. So creating the custom connector. So what I'm going to do is the first demo, I call the API using the HTTP connector. And I'm going to create a custom connector to the same API, but I will show you what is the difference between HTTP connector and using the custom connector as an end user. Right. So I'm switching the screen so you can see it.
Yep, we can see.
Yep. All right. So what I would do is, going back to my solutions. Yeah, I still have my custom connector just in case if the demo is not working. So I want to do, I want to create a new custom connector. And so the creating manually, it may not be for everyone, but what I would like to show you is it is actually really easy to create a new custom connector. So let's say, give the name demo POC API. And you can put like a background color, give the descriptions and the host. This is can be the you can get from the Postman. My host is this base is the API. So next part is the security. So currently it's in the API. I'm securing the API with the API key or API code, whatever we call. And so we can define that. Authentication is based on the API key. Parameter label is a code, parameter main code. Where it is in the query string, so not in the header, it's in the query. So you can also make a API key a pass of the query. So you can do that as well. So when I click the next, and here what we can do is we can create a new action. So basically this action is the actual API. So what I'm going to call is a ping me and operation ID in the UI. So this is just scaling, just the operation ID that will be displayed in the Power Automate. And I want to do the post to. So this looks like I said, this looks a bit technical, but this is more like a one-time setups. And the body part, I have this data, and I can paste it like that. So basically, this is just create from the sample, it will create the definitions. So now import it and they make a post. Basically, what they say is, I'm going to make a post to this API, and I will need to pass the body. And so basically, that's pretty much it. So I will create a new connector here. It may take a few more seconds. What is that? Probably this operation ID. So it is now connector successfully created, and what we can do is we can test. All right. So now when you test it, we need to create a connection. So this custom connectors we can treat like the existing out-of-the-box connector that we have in Power Automate. So for example, database connector, when you first use it, you have to create a new connections to the database. So basically, when we do the new connections here, it will ask me an API key because I need to use that key to authenticate to the API that I have. So basically, this is the API key that I have. And the good part is that this API key is not embedded in the custom connector. So it can be, you can supply a different key if you are connecting to another endpoint. So create a new connections. So this created at this time, and as you can see, now I'm not passing the JSON anymore. It will ask me a name. So let's see. I'm testing operation. So it returned me this. So this is just a testing. So how do we actually use this custom connector in the Power Automate? So I will switch back to I will reopen the cloud flow that I created. I'll actually create that. So this cloud flow has the HTTP connector as that we first created, and when we created, so this enter it. So next part, what we're going to do is our custom connector. So this the demo POC API1 that I just created. The actions, you got the pin me, and now because I'm first creating the using this a custom connector, so it asking me to provide a connection. So what I'm saying is this is a dev POC API. That's just connection name, doesn't really matter. And I will provide my code. So this is like a creating a connections to database, but this is a creating a connections to mine API, which is a just an external API. So that the process can be repeated for any API. And now, as you can see, all I need to provide is just a name. So if you compare this here, I need to worry about the post method. I need to worry about the URI, the key, and the JSONs. But when I compare it to this, what I'm doing is passing the name, right? So let me show you the need to save. So it runs successfully. Basically, it's basically doing the same thing, but as you can see, I can still get the same result. I get the same result from the HTTP, but it is to make the call. It's a lot more complex than to use the custom connector. So that's why the custom connector is quite useful in the sense. So for any questions, any clarifications?
AK, I've got a question. So
Yep.
I used custom connectors in the past and for personal use, not necessarily commercial.
Yep.
And a couple of scenarios where I use them is for my home automation. So I've got some Netgear Arlo cameras. I've got a Yale smart lock at home.
Yep.
And as you said, all of those use more or less standard ways of authentication, of retrieving a token and
Yep.
passing that token back into your query. And then
Yep.
the rest is basically a post request or a get request that is very much a standard REST
Yep.
request. Now, generating that token usually requires something like either a username or a password, a client ID, and a secret.
Yep.
And then that gives you the token, and then you pass that token as you were demonstrating, either in the header or in the query.
Yep.
Would it be a good idea to actually add that query, that token generation call within your custom connector as one of the calls so that you can pass it on the username and password? It will then generate the token, and then you would then pass it back into your query.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely doable, and because this is what I'm going to show, but not exactly the same thing that what I can show in the last part of the presentations. So where we can tweak these things to make it make more user friendly and make it Yeah, so this is So this is just to compare like the HTTP and the custom connector, and you can we can straight away see the difference between the HTTP and the custom connector, and it just take out all the unnecessary complex thing from the just is happening in the backend side. So we don't really need to care.
Absolutely, and that's the whole point, because if you wanna make another call to get the token, this is the same as doing an HTTP request. Yep. So embedding that in a custom connector is a good idea. All right, I'm keen to see the rest.
Yeah, cool. So so the custom connector now is we talk about all the good things. Now the challenge we have here is this custom connector. If you notice this, the host UI is quite static, and once it's host UI quite static, we have a challenge because all these API that we integrate, especially in like your own API, so we have different endpoint for the different environments, right? So for example, dev, you got dev-api.poc, and UAT, you got the UAT API POC, and prod. Sometimes there's some people use PRD, but sometimes we just drop the PRD, and you can see the naming is not really consistent anymore. And as we go through, if we have to create the custom connector for each environment, that will be like you have the dev custom connector, you have the dev custom connection reference, and then you have the dev connections. And again, we repeat the same thing again. UAT custom connector, create a production custom connector. So this is a quite challenging for us. And also, the good thing is like we got different approach to make it really dynamic. So basically, we want to take out these duplication on the first two column and leave the conditions as it on the each environment. The first way is the use of the Azure API management, and so that means that we by applying the inbound policies in API, so we can kind of redirect the API call to the different API. So basically, you have the connector here. We got the single APIM, and then based on the parameter that we call to the APIM, it can read or write to dev environment or prod environment or UAT environment. But this is only kind of a recommended approach if your API is really lightweight, and if the organization is quite small, and you don't want to complicate all this stuff. But actually, this method, we are not making the host URL dynamic. We are just trying to use the same URL, which is the APIM, and trying to use a policy to connect to the different type of environments. So, like I said, it's perfectly fine to use it, but in the enterprise organization, large organization, this is not really a known. This is a no approach. Another thing is like we can do the transformation in the DevOps pipelines, and by updating this host URL during when you generate the artifacts for different environment. What I mean by that is we got the pack pipelines, and the pipeline for the UAT, we transform the UAT and then replace the UAT host and create the UAT connectors and as an artifacts, and same thing for the productions environment. So hopefully that's Rami, that's like a that makes sense from the DevOps perspective, because I'm not really the DevOps person.
Yeah. We do that quite often. We sort of use the pipeline, and the good thing about this approach is that your configuration is actually stored in source control. So you would have the list of configurations. As you trigger your pipeline, it would know which environment it's pushing to, and it would know exactly how to replace it and so on, for sure.
Yeah. So if I'm the DevOps person, probably I would stop here. But I'm not really a DevOps person, so I refuse to transform it, and I'm trying to find another way. And when I find another way, I find a few more things that we can do. We can use the environment variables in the custom connectors. So for example, you use the environment variable value as a host name and the base URL, or even like your authentication, like client ID and secret can be from the environment variables. And then this environment variables can be from Azure Key Vault. Not sure it is the working fine or not, because there's some features that environment variable can be mapped to the Azure Key Vault. So all these things can be quite secure, but the downside is still in the preview. And also I just find like to use the custom connector, probably using the environment variable is kind of like defeating the purpose of that you want to decouple all these the configurations and logics out of your custom connector definitions. And I find another way, and then I find like you can actually apply the policy in the custom connectors. So this policy is quite similar to the previous slide from the APIN policies, where you can transform some of the incoming message and at the header at the query, but it is not really powerful. So this is more like a simplified version of the APIN policy. It's limited capabilities, but this limited capability can make a quite much difference. So I'm going to focus on that, creating the policies in the custom connectors. So now let's try to apply this policy in the custom connectors, right? And so let me switch to this screen. I have this custom connector APIN. So I have another API. So currently this is the dev API, and I also have the test API, right? So imagine we deploy this custom connector to test environment. We need to connect to the API from the test environment. So I pass the AK again, K1, and it returns. So basically, barring that, like we have the difference in the host URL and function a different function key. I might do this something slightly different, but it doesn't really matter. The only thing is we're calling the API, we're calling the URL, and we pass something, and it does something, right? So if I am going to create a new connections using this API key at my current existing connector, so let's create it. So you would notice I can successfully create it. The reason is when you create the connections, it doesn't really validate whether you can connect or not, right? So it is just a storing that API key, and I should have two connection here, and one is just created recently, which is using the API key to the test environment. I'm using that. I'm passing my name and test the operation. I receive 401. The 401 is the unauthorized access HTTP code. The reason is this custom connector is still configured to talk to the dev environment, and I'm supplying the API key using my test environment. So that actually makes sense because it cannot authenticate it, then it will jump at the 401. So if you remember in this slide, so if we're going to create another custom connector, obviously we can. It will be like a demo POC test API with the host URL. It will be test API and POC, right? So obviously it will work, but what we're trying to avoid is not to create a custom connector for each environment. So to do that, I'm going back to this something called the definitions. And if we scroll down, you will see a policy here, right? The policies, if I click new, let's see, set host URL. And the template, you can see like a quite limited number of things that you can do. You can write the request, if you like a set host URL, you can update the host URL. You can route the request to the from one actions. If you have multiple action from one action to another, you can inject the HTTP header. You can inject the query string parameter, and see a lot of things that coming up here, but most of them are state preview. But for this demonstration purpose, the set host URL alone is enough. So when I choose the template, and there will be the operation, you can choose. This is basically the actions from the left-hand side. If I have multiple actions, you will see it. But some of the policy you can choose to apply to only the specific actions. If you don't choose anything, it will apply to everything, right? So what I'm going to do here is I can update the URL template. So URL template will be HTTPS, right? And here, let me use this something called connection parameters. I will call this API URL and maybe the API. So basically what I'm saying is every time before I call the actions, I want the API URL from the connection parameters and set that as the host URL before we call it. So when I do that, I can update it. It's raining heavily here. How's the weather there, Rami?
Yeah, same in Upper Hutt. It's just started raining.
Yeah. So you might wonder where is the connection parameters, and to answer that, it is nowhere on this screen. So we have to manually kind of download it and update it. But there's like a command that you can connect from the Visual Studio Code, and you work with this custom connector. But for the demonstration purpose, what I would do is I would just do it manually. So I'll do is I'm going back to my solutions. Right. Make sure it is unmanaged so that I can re-input again. So this is not really the best practice, but just to show how we can do like a really quick and dirty. But once we know how it can be done, we can work in the proper way.
Yeah, so it would be interesting to see what is that command, because the way I'm thinking about it, similar to what you were saying before, typically the unmanaged solution will be extracted and then stored in your source control. Yep. And through a DevOps pipeline, you can go and fiddle with that solution to make it ready for the next environment. Yep. You would use the pack CLI to repackage it as managed using command line, so you don't need an instance of Dataverse or Dynamics, and then you would push it into the right environment, having made that change. So if there is a command line interface to do it, then it works within automation and all of that.
Right, so it's downloaded, and this is version 1002. What I'm gonna do is I'll open it. And obviously we got a few bunch of a connector, so I'm in trouble now. API. All right, so probably. So this is 20.2D.201. All right, here. So this you will see this is all the custom connector that I created. All these 4 files is basically related to that. So if I open the Open API definitions, yes, open it. So basically, there's nothing new. It's all these Swagger definitions. But like I said, in the DevOps, we can obviously replace this host URL and during the DevOps pipelines. But what we're trying to do here is not to do that at all. So this was just a Swagger definitions, and there's another thing called the connection parameters.json. So So if you remember that we need to supply the API key as part of the connection. So when you use the connector, we need to create a connections with a connection name and API key. So what I'm going to do is duplicate that. Oops. I will call this as the API URL. The type, because it's a URL, it doesn't really need to be secure, but if you use a secure string, you will see like a max, kind of like a text box, so you can read it. But this is the readable text, so I will use the strings. The display name, let's say the URL. I mean, that's nothing exciting here. So you can say type in, so when you use kind of this, clear text. Yep, we want to make it clear text so that you can read it, and we want to make it require to create a connections. So basically what I'm doing is I'm creating another connection parameters called API URL. And if you remember in the custom connector that I just made it, I use the set host URL policy, and I replace the API URL as the host URL. So now what I would do, I will save this. And repackage it. So repackage is basically zip. And I will input back to my dev environment. So if we are doing that, I would recommend we create a solutions that contain only the custom connector, but not like I'm doing, like I'm just export everything in the solutions. But the better way is just to export the one thing that we want to make changes. So I'm importing back. That's all right.
So now it's overriding the connector that you already have, right?
Yes, that's right. So the only thing I'm doing is because I can't do it from the user interface. And hopefully, obviously, if I connect to the the command line from my Visual Studio, I should be able to do that. But this is doing like a really bare minimum, and imagine that I don't have any tools to do that. Right. So yeah, one of the reasons I say is we only should be exporting and importing the changes that we want, that one component, because it can take sometimes. So far that makes sense. And is there any other questions? Right, so it's completed, imported successfully. Let me open it again. I will close this. So if I edit this custom connector again, so here we don't really change dev environment or host URL. You can see even though if we add the connection parameter, it is not export anywhere because it's only this interface only mainly work for like a Swagger editor, which is an open API definition. So what I'm going to do now is create a test, and this time I'm creating another new connections, and you will see the difference here. So now you can see I'm asking a URL, right? So what is the URL? Okay, so let's say test.api POC. Maybe I'm better copy here. Right, so I'm saying I want to connect to this URL, and I want to use this code. Right, so basically this is a connections to test environment. Now if I say K1, oh, 500, what is that? Oh, API URL is not in the connection parameter. Right. So this is coming from this one. Why is that? What is there? Let me take that out just to see.
Was there something missing in the custom field that you added, or?
No, this I'm still getting the head around with what is the right format to use.
Oh, I think we lost your audio.
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me, Romy?
Yes.
Right, cool. All right. Okay, what is that? It might be space. Yeah, I'm still figuring out how does it represent. So what I'm gonna do? Let me just take the underscore away.
We can edit that part from the recording, AK, so it's all good.
It's all right. See, I tried twice, and it was working fine, and now it's not working anymore.
Demo gods.
Yeah, one more try. Otherwise, I can show you the existing one. So yeah, I just like couldn't find the the right things, like whether it's underscore is replaced by space or is can we use an underscore, but I'm still figuring out. So what I do is I basically just taking out the complication, just use the API URL so that hopefully that will work better.
Do you think it will be case sensitive as well?
Yeah, it should be, yeah, because that should be case sensitive. Just that I couldn't figure it out yet, whether what is the translation of the underscore.
Yep.
So while we're waiting for that, just quickly go through that. So yeah. And the results is what we're trying to do here is we got previously, custom connector on the each environment, different type of custom connector with a different URL and different type of connections and connection reference. From there to like we have the ones custom connector can be deployed to different environment have related to the connection reference. And then the only thing that we need to worry about is the connections on the different environment. So basically we have the custom connector and can be linked to the connection reference, and you got the connection. So this custom connector can work on multi-bed environments. That's the one we like making this. There's a few more things that we can do. It's like as you can see in the policy, there's a lot of things on the preview features. So you can see, 6 are in the preview features. We only have 4 and then not in preview. So hopefully they will come out of the preview, and hopefully there will be a lot more policy that we can put in there. And also you can write a custom code in the custom connector. That must be the C# code, and the total execution time should be less. It should be less than 5 seconds, and the whole code should be less than 1 megabyte. So 1 megabyte for the custom code is actually a huge code, but I was personally wouldn't write the code in the custom connector because custom connector is supposed to be, to me, it's kind of like a lightweight, just interface between your applications and the third-party API. If we need to write the custom code, probably it's better to write on the server side on your own API, but not on the custom connector. But there may be some cases that we might write a custom code, but again, this is in the preview feature, so this is not really a recommended way. Yeah. Okay, coming back to that, let's try again. Hopefully this time will work. So going through the quickly that the codes view, you can see you can write your code here and copy and paste. And as you can see, like once you turn it on, this code will run. So basically, if you don't want to write just for like a transformation, just a transformation of one format to another, and if you don't want to write the API, probably it can be achieved here. So this is created as the latest one. Maybe I probably have to create a new one. Code.
Do you want to update, I think, in the definition to make sure it's API capital URL?
Oh, yeah, that's good. Oh, yeah. I'm still using that. Ooh, thanks for that. So this is the latest one that I created. Okay, one.
Suspense.
It depends. So it comes from test environment. So now what I will show you is going back to the actual cloud flow. And so what I will do is I will remove this actions. I'll go to there, let demo POC, go there. And this time I want to create two files on my dev API and POC one. The URL for dev is this, and that is the API key for the dev. Create one. And press AK here, another steps. Here I will create another connections. So this is test API and POC one. All right, so save it. Oh, it should pass name, right? So you can see there's two different connections. One is going to the dev environment and one is going to the test environment. And hopefully I give the correct code. Yay. So this one, it came from dev environment, exactly the same connector. Next one, same connector, that's coming from the test environment. So you got the control to where you want to connect to the custom connector. Yeah, so this is I think just right on time. And so in the future sections that I'm planning to do is like a versioning of these API and a little bit some of the API operations you want to make it like a legacy or the preview kind of stuff. And I'm going to do all I'm doing here right now is more like an action. So you invoke the API, but we can also create a trigger like if something happened on your API, you want to trigger the Power Automate flow, that kind of things we can do it. And I'm working on that too for another demo. And once the custom code is out of the preview, then obviously I'm playing around with it, but when I'll just a preview, I will put another sessions about the writing the custom code in the custom connectors. So, and there's other things like you can do. You can create your own custom connector and certify and make it appear in the one of the connector on the 643 connectors currently we have in Power Automate. That's totally possible, but I'm not in that part yet. I have no plan to create those kind of the certification part in the future, in the near future. But if we have anybody working on that part, then I'd like to learn it. And if you know anybody that if you can reach out to me, that would be really great.
Yeah, it's definitely something
yes.
that is done in the community, AK.
Yeah.
So in fact, the people from Microsoft that support the certification of those custom connectors encourage people from the community to submit their own, and they're differentiating between the official connector and then the community contributed connector. They still check it to make sure that it does follow the standards and all of that, but it's lesser of an official connector. As an example, like there'll be multiple Zoom connectors because every person thinks the official one is not good enough, so they go and create their own, and then they share that, and then it gets approved. So yeah, definitely something that can be done.
Yeah. Another thing that I forgot to mention here is the difference between the HTTP and a custom connector. Even though the custom connector is the wrapper of the HTTP connector, as far as I know, HTTP connector, you cannot call the HTTP connector in the Canvas apps. But if you create a custom connector, the custom connector can be a data source in the Canvas apps. So that is another the benefit that offer over the HTTP connector.
Sounds good.
Oh,
hey,
right.
AK, I had a quick question. So I've noticed that you created the connection, and if you notice, it says connection reference.
Yeah.
Is that solution aware, or would you have a connection already created in your instance, and then when you go and deploy it, the connection reference will automatically pick that connection?
So what usually do is any connector that I use, a connection reference is kind of like a solution aware. But as a deployment, in the deployment, I think we can use the deployment settings file which actually map the connection reference and the target connection ID. So obviously I have to create the connections before deployment in the new environment. But as soon as I get the connections, I update the deployment settings files to match the connection reference.
Right. Yeah. But if you have to create your connection before you deploy, it wouldn't be aware of the differences, like the different attributes that are in the connection. Like in your case, it was the URL.
Yeah, possibly yes, you can. And also there's a way to create the connections automatically, I think through the Power Automate for admin connectors, where we can create the connections. Basically, you can create the connections to all these connectors, so that just one of the action is like a create connections. So these settings might be stored somewhere like a key vault or any other place that we want to securely store.
Sounds good. Cool. Do we have any other questions from people on the call? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay, where's my Teams? Am I still sharing my screen?
Yeah, you're still sharing. I think we're all good, AK.
Right, all here, I think.
Yeah, so a couple of things, AK. It would be interesting to see if you've blogged about that, because you've shown us some hidden gems that I think would be really interesting to share with the rest of the community, like wider community as well.
Yep.
Because like I didn't know about, you can hack the connector basically and go and add it into your solution, re-import it, and all of a sudden it appears in there. I mean, this is definitely something with blogging about. So would be really interesting to see that. The other thing is that I'm absolutely keen to see the triggers, because I'm assuming this is like an event-driven sort of connector. So you would wait for an event to happen, and when that event happens, then your connector automatically triggers. Is that correct?
That's right. So in Trigger, there's like two different type of trigger. One is the kind of like a webhook base, and another one is the kind of like a pooling. So it's like a checking it, and if you have any update, it trigger it. So actually, what I show today is more like a low hanging fruit, easy one, and not too complex one. Yes, the triggers are really interesting, and it is pretty useful.
Yeah, I'll be really keen to do that, because again, for my home automation, I'm always checking, like, is the door open or closed? Right? Is the lock locked or unlocked? I'm keep thinking, like, I can pull it, but if there is an event that then tell me a changed state, then that's exactly what I want, and I can embed that in my automation. So looking forward to the next session.
Right. Cool.
All right, if there's nothing else, thank you very much, AK, for your time. It was an awesome presentation. I really enjoyed it and definitely learned some new things. This session is recorded, so it will be on YouTube. And if anything goes well, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, I can send you the presentations if you're going to post it somewhere.
Sounds good. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, AK.
All right.
Cheers.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Have a good evening. Bye.